Hello, and welcome to this event on operationalizing threat intelligence, insights into leveraging cyber threat intelligence programs. Today's webinar is sponsored by Palo Alto's Unit 42 and produced by Actual Tech Media. My name is Scott Becker. I'm from Actual Tech, and I am excited to be your moderator to introduce a great discussion panel. Now, before we get to today's exciting conversation, we have three housekeeping items that will help you get the most out of this session. First off, we want this to be an informative event for you, so we encourage any questions in the questions box in your webinar control panel. Not only will we have team members responding to questions during the live event, but we'll also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the presentation where we'll discuss in greater detail some of the top questions that you ask. That Q&A panel is also the place to let us know about any technical issues that you might be experiencing. A browser refresh will fix most audio, video, or slide advancement issues, but if that doesn't work, just let us know there in the Q&A and we'll provide further technical assistance. Now, second, in the handout section of your webinar control panel, you'll find that we're offering several really interesting resources. I'd especially like to call your attention to an independent report on cyber threat intelligence programs. That one's from the Enterprise Strategy Group. There's a link with information about the Unit 42 retainer for incident response services. And there's also a link to a white paper on how SOAR is transforming threat intelligence. So I encourage you to access those resources now and share them with your friends and your colleagues. Now, third, at the end of this webinar event, we'll be awarding a $250 Amazon gift card to one lucky registrant. Of course, you must be in attendance during the live event to qualify for the prize. Official terms and conditions of today's prize drawing can be found in the handout section. Just scroll to the bottom and you'll find the link with the details there. And with that out of the way, let's get to today's timely discussion. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. We have Joshua Costa, who's Director of Product Marketing at Palo Alto. We have Joseph Opacki, who's a Senior Director for Unit 42 Threat Intelligence. And we have Kyle Wilhoit, who's a Director of Threat Research for Unit 42. So now I'm going to turn it over to Joshua.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining from the world. Really appreciate you all joining this presentation today on operationalizing threat intelligence, and in particular, taking a look at CTI programs. So as you all probably know, in today's cyber threat landscape, there's just so much information out there about how threat actors are targeting organizations, the TTPs that they're using, and ultimately what defenses can be implemented by organizations to either prevent or respond to the types of threats that we're seeing on a daily basis. And today we're going to talk about how CTI, or cyber threat intelligence programs, are helping organizations with managing all of that information and ultimately protecting themselves and enhancing their security programs. My name is Josh Costa. I am the Director of Product Marketing for Unit 42 and Cortex. I joined Palo Alto Networks about 2 years ago, initially to lead the technical enablement program for our Unit 42 program. I've got about 10 years of digital forensics and incident response experience, having had the privilege to lead some of the largest breaches in the US. And my background and education are all in responding to cybersecurity incidents and digital forensics. And then obviously that has helped me understand personally the value of having strong threat intelligence to ultimately drive security efforts forward. You're also going to hear today from Joe Opacki and Kyle Wilhoit. These are the true experts in cyber threat intelligence. I'm going to hand it off to these gentlemen to first introduce themselves and then get things rolling, starting with Joe. Joe, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. My name is Joe Opacki, as Josh said. Hello, everyone. Just want to give you a little bit of background as well. So I am a co-author of a book called Operationalizing Threat Intelligence, along with Kyle Wilhoit, who's our other guest speaker to this today. Right now, I'm serving as the Senior Director of Threat Intelligence at Unit 42 at Palo Alto Networks. I've been with Palo Alto Networks for about 5 years. In addition to that work, I work a lot in academia. I'm currently a professor at George Mason University, where I teach in the Masters of Digital Forensics and Cyber Analysis program. I also work with the Cybersecurity Curriculum Advisory Board at the University of Maryland Global Campus, as well as on the Board of Advisors at Clemson Cybersecurity Center. Previous to my private sector career, I previously worked in the public sector, where I retired in 2014 from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, where I was serving as the Technical Director of Advanced Digital Forensics in the Operational Technology Division. In addition to doing all this work, I oftentimes write outside the book. So I've written for Dark Reading and a few other sources, and I'm an active security conference speaker to include conferences like Underground Economy, Digital Crimes Consortium, International Conference on Cybersecurity, RSA, etc. I've even spoken, I testified essentially at the Federal Trade Commission on ransomware previously.
Kyle, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Awesome. Yeah, hi, everybody. So my name is Kyle Wilhoit. I'm the Director of Threat Research on Unit 42 Threat Intelligence. I've been at Palo Alto Networks for about 5 years, where I actually started as a principal level researcher, specifically focusing on nation-state espionage groups as well as exploitation. I've been in threat intel for around 15 years. I've been on the Black Hat US Review Board for about 7 years at this point. And I've spoken at several different conferences, including Black Hat US, Black Hat EU, DEF CON, Hack in the Box, Blue Hat, several others. As I mentioned, previously a researcher at Palo Alto Networks, was at Domain Tools, Trend Micro, FireEye, and other organizations primarily focused on, again, that intelligence aspect on hunt teams and doing that collection enrichment in regards to threat intelligence. I published several blogs and white papers on originally performed research across all of those different organizations. And I've been the co-author on 2 books. The first was Hacking Exposed Industrial Control Systems, where we examine the inner workings of industrial control systems and operational technology. And then secondly, the co-author on the book that I authored with Joe, Operationalizing Threat Intelligence. So that's a little bit about myself. Now let's jump in directly into looking at the agenda. Before I look in and examine the agenda a little bit closer, I still wanted to first mention that if you have any questions during this presentation, we'll be monitoring the QA and answering them throughout. So in this agenda, we're really trying to look through an all-encompassing kind of environment across threat intelligence. We're first going to be covering what is CTI. There's a lot of miscommunication, a lot of misunderstandings about the definition of CTI, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit greater detail on this section. We're also going to be talking about specifically what you can do with cyber threat intelligence. What is it that you can actually apply and do with CTI? We'll also talk about what it looks like to operationalize threat intelligence and CTI programs inside of your organization. We'll talk about the common challenges that are encountered with those CTI programs and the implementation of those programs. And then finally, Josh is going to walk through what our solution is to operationalizing that inside of your own organizational environment using some of our tools. So with that, let's just dive straight into what is CTI. There's a lot of misrepresentation, a lot of misunderstanding about what CTI is. And specifically in this case, organizations will oftentimes talk about TTP reports being CTI. They'll talk about exploit info, dark web info, vulnerability information, indicators of compromise, etc. And realistically, what it comes down to is, from our perspective, many organizations will oftentimes confine or confuse the different types of terms in regards to CTI. So if we examine this a little bit closer and we look at the actual confusion around this, we can kind of examine that in a little bit greater detail. So if we go to the next slide, we'll talk about where that confusion lies and why is there that confusion. That confusion is largely due to the fact that each organization defines CTI differently based on their motivation. Organizations often define CTI through their own perspective and their own objectives, and their motivation is to build detection rules. CTI could be defined one way. If the organization's motivation is to stay updated with the latest threats targeting the industry, they likely define that CTI as being different as well. And while all of that is understandable and each organization has their own unique viewpoint and motivations, it's still important to examine what CTI is more broadly. And more broadly speaking, the way we define CTI is data and information that is collected, processed, and analyzed in order to determine a threat actor's motives, intents, and capabilities, all with the objective of focusing on an event or trends to better inform and create an advantage for defenders. The main point to take home there is that the CTI aspects that we're going to be talking about in this presentation really need to drive home that advantage for defenders. At the end of the day, CTI functions are meant to help inform defenders to better defend the organization that the CTI program is intended to function within. So from that, now that we've talked a little bit about what our definition is, let's talk and look at a little bit closer what we can actually do with CTI. In this case, we're going to be looking at examining the concept of operationalizing through CTI programs when we align broadly to the threat intelligence lifecycle, or those 5 stages that you're seeing indicated here. In this 5-phased approach, operationalization occurs from the planning and direction phase all the way down to the sharing or dissemination stage. Let's examine each of those phases in a little bit greater detail just to give a fundamental understanding of what happens in each of those phases. In the planning stage, the first stage, the organization identifies their objectives and problems they are trying to solve with a CTI program. This also includes broadly defining how collection and enrichment are going to occur in the subsequent phases down that line. The planning stage is really core to what a CTI program is, primarily because if you're not planning properly and you don't understand the organization's objectives for the CTI program, you're off to a bad start automatically. So planning is key to the success of a CTI program in regards to its implementation. Moving on into the collection phase, the organization would want to collect data, information, and intelligence in an automated, manual, or semi-automated way to fulfill the CTI program requirements. Collection requirements are also created in this phase, which are essentially the policies, guidelines, and procedures to create and to formulate the standardized collection of intelligence data. This is the aspect of the organization truly collecting the data that they're going to add context and analysis and processing on. And this is foundational again, because this is the core data that the organization is going to be collecting and adding that context on. Next up in the processing phase, the organization would seek to convert the large amounts of data, like log files from endpoints, into a usable form that facilitates analysis and processing. Common things like filtering and adding indicator information into a threat intelligence platform in an automated or manual way would be an example of operationalizing the processing stage. So this is, again, adding that context and making that data available and searchable and in a way that allows analysts to add that context and understand that context in a concise and repeatable fashion. Moving right along, the analysis phase is where most organizations will start to see the benefit of the CTI program. In this phase, analysts hunt, pivot, cluster, tag, and perform analysis on the data that was collected and processed in the previous phases. The intention of the analysis phase is to add context to the data that has been collected and processed. The context provided via the analysis phase should ultimately inform the defenders of the organization, as I mentioned earlier. An example of analysis and contextualization would be adding malware family tags to specific malware hashes in a threat intelligence platform. That's one example of the operationalization of the analysis phase in regards to your CTI program. And then finally, let's examine the last phase, sharing or dissemination. Here, the motivation often varies organization to organization, but generally speaking, sharing is the concept of producing the intelligence in a way that is digestible by the many stakeholders within the organization. This could be weekly reports of tagged malware families seen in the organizational environment, or it could be detection rules deployed to your EDR solution, or sharing that act of putting that intelligence back into work inside of the organization. The idea of the sharing and dissemination phase is taking the contextualized data and intelligence that have been produced from the previous 4 stages and making it actionable in some capacity in the organization. Again, helping inform the defenders of the organization and put in blocking techniques, alerting techniques, etc. So that's just taking a brief look at operationalizing through the CTI programs, specifically, again, aligning to the threat intelligence lifecycle. So if we continue on, now let's go ahead and just look at one additional place that's of key interest from our findings. One thing that we like to hone in on is examining how long CTI programs have been active inside of organizations. And one thing is for sure, that the idea of a CTI program inside of an organization is not necessarily new. If you look at this, roughly 75% of organizations say and indicate that they have CTI programs that are anywhere from 3 years to 10 years old. So the idea of a CTI program is inside of an organization isn't necessarily new, but it is maturing. Because if we compare that, several other things, such as 1 year or less, that's only 5.9%. And out of that, between 2 to 3 years is 12.9%. And what we're trying to indicate here is, again, the concept of a CTI organization is not necessarily new. It's just the way in which organizations are implementing it are oftentimes different. So based on this, I'm going to pass it over to Joe now, and we're going to dive in a little bit deeper into some of these core concepts that I've discussed.
Thank you, Kyle. As Kyle was mentioning, the idea of a CTI program within an organization is not something new. However, one of the things that we've observed over time is that the program objectives have been changing, moving from SOC-based response to strategic decision making with the creation of the chief information security officer as a C-level executive, as an example. Cyber threat intelligence programs can be implemented proactively to better understand the threats and reinforce existing security processes and controls, but they also could be reactive based on the cyber threat landscape that the organization is observing or specific trends or events to that organization. So what's driving the CTI program development? Well, many organizations have established CTI programs for a multitude of reasons, including, creating a digital risk protection program, moving to better reaction after attack, helping them build a threat-informed decision-making process, or to just monitor threats to third parties, essentially. CISOs often initiate a CTI program when they start a new job. So oftentimes when a new CISO comes on board in an organization, one of the first things they look at is the maturity of the CTI program, and they'll put some goals and objectives into place to mature that program for what they're trying to accomplish. CISOs need to understand that to understand risk in order to evaluate that risk for just strategic decision-making, as they have to report to the board or the C-level executives or the C-suite, essentially. When we see threat intel teams that are SOC driven, one of the things that we make the determination is that if your threat intel team is in the SOC, then it's probably more tactical in nature, focusing on security posture improvement, hardening the attack surface, utilizing blocking indicators of compromise, and as an example. However, what we're seeing is the CTI program objectives are moving into more strategic form, so that they could do these things like threat-informed defense, operationalizing attack TTPs, or even working on compliance for the organization. So we're going to talk a little bit about some challenges with CTI programs, because there's, as we said before, the definition of CTI, cyber threat intelligence, is different based upon the organization that you're operating in. We've identified three primary challenges with CTI programs. The first being that there's too much data to consume. CTI data can be overwhelming, separating noise can be difficult. Secondly, there's a lot of different technologies, not just on consumption, but managing the information associated with that threat intelligence. And then finally, there's a lack of expertise. Many organizations don't have the expertise to effectively analyze and action CTI data. For example, a lot of organizations question what value they get from threat intelligence, and even very mature programs still suffer with a vehicle to measure return on investment of cyber threat intelligence, any key performance indicators associated with cyber threat intelligence, or even just defining success metrics around how threat intel has driven the success of their overall security programs or the overall security posture of the organization. So let's start with the first challenge. There's too much data to consume, and that's absolutely correct. So most organizations start by looking at the development of a cyber threat program by saying, hey, where do I get the threat intel that my organization wants to consume? And I want to say that even though this is the very first question, this is probably too broad in a sense of what they're trying to accomplish. They should really be asking the question is, what's the right data to consume for what we're trying to accomplish as a threat intel program? Essentially putting goals and objectives for what they need through collection requirements or intel requirements or anything like that. The second thing is, with the broad amount of data that they're consuming and they can get, they often also struggle with their ability to gauge the quality, the credibility, the reliability of that cyber threat intelligence data. With all these resources that exist, it generates a lot of noise. And sometimes it's hard to identify the true value of the intelligence that the organization is bringing in. More importantly, as I was saying before, with this broad amount of data that's coming into the organization, most organizations suffer because they are not, they're not more organized around defining the appropriate goals of the CTI program. With what I was saying before is, with an appropriate CTI program, essentially, they can define the data that they need to consume to meet the overall objectives of the program. Oftentimes, the collection of a large amount of data brings in so much noise, it doesn't allow an organization essentially to focus on what data is important to the business. The second thing we want to talk about is the amount of disparate technologies associated with the consumption of cyber threat intelligence, the management of cyber threat intelligence, and the dissemination of cyber threat intelligence. There's a large amount of varying technology platforms that are used by organizations, from large scale commercial platforms to just homegrown tools that are built by CTI organizations with, small groups doing tooling. However, some of the things that have to be answered by an organization who is looking at technology to manage, collect, or disseminate is they have to understand what is the right technologies that they need to support the collection, the processing, and the analysis of the threat intelligence. In addition to that, because of a large amount of sources of threat intelligence, they have to ask the question how the organization is going to consume that data. How does it take that threat intelligence and how does it utilize it? Is it something that's consumed via human interaction, or is there some type of security automation in place that allows them to automate how that threat intelligence is orchestrated by the company, how they consume it, how they leverage it? Also, in evaluating the technologies of an organization, it's not just about how they collect, manage, and disseminate. It's also about the technologies that the organization has within their technology stack. They need to have a full understanding of where the organization is going to utilize the cyber threat intelligence that's disseminated out of their CTI program. And then finally, because any technical infrastructure that's utilized to obtain a goal, but is going to require some sort of investment, we often see that organizations lack the investment in the underlying technologies to make cyber threat intelligence programs really successful. So finally, in our last challenge here we see around cyber threat intelligence programs is that there's a lot of lack of expertise. So when looking at hiring individuals who work in cyber threat programs, the first thing from a hiring manager should be, the question a hiring manager should ask is, what are the important qualifications to someone to work with cyber threat intelligence, right? Most of the time when faced with this question, they're looking for someone who has a background in threat intelligence, because most of what threat intelligence practitioners do is traditionally considered to be tradecraft, meaning they need to create an analytic judgment from the analysis of empirical data and provide some confidence level around what they're saying. However, when evaluating cyber threat intelligence and the skill sets needed, largely these individuals are dominated by a lot of differentiating security skill sets. And I would say, most cyber threat professionals who are very proficient in this field oftentimes are true jack of all trades and really not a master of one specific thing. Academically, also, if you look around for higher level education around cyber threat intelligence, there's still a lack of formal education programs in place. I'd say that the majority of universities are focusing on cybersecurity programs for educating users to work in the cybersecurity industry, but cyber threat intelligence is a very niche program within the cybersecurity education community. Also, when looking over the ability to be proficient in the different phases of intelligence production, the lack of training and expertise around the life cycle can be very impactful. So a couple of real quick examples is the dissemination and feedback are the traditional problem areas for most cyber threat programs, where the format of the intelligence being disseminated is not really well received, or there's not a lot of feedback associated with the value of that intelligence. Also, for cyber threat intelligence to be useful, it has to be timely, it has to be actionable, so that it can be implemented and used within the goals of the overall CTI program. However, if we, as an example, run into problems during the analysis phase, it can affect all those downstream phases, meaning that, potentially by the time the dissemination and feedback phases occur, that threat intelligence can possibly be no longer actionable, no longer timely. And this could be serious issues as far as the implementation and utilization of that cyber threat intelligence.
Yeah, thanks so much, Joe. Appreciate it. And thanks so much, Kyle. Really appreciate both of your insights on threat intelligence and obviously some of the challenges that exist today. I know that that's something you all are working on a daily basis and looking to solve and frankly do it very well. And so with that, what I want to do is just spend a few minutes talking about how Palo Alto Networks, and in particular, how Unit 42 and Cortex can help our customers with solving some of those challenges that you just discussed, Joe, with CTI programs overall. I'll start with the last challenge that you just talked about, Joe, which is how most organizations lack the internal expertise to effectively analyze the vast amounts of CTI data and then translate that into some kind of action, right? The operationalization of threat intelligence and then disseminating that through programs that exist within their organization. We all know that the cyber threat landscape is extremely dynamic. It's impossible to be an expert on everything, right? We've got nation state actors, we've got organized crime groups, ransomware operators. There's varying levels of motivation across all these different actors. They're leveraging new and evolving TTPs all the time. And organizations, I think at the end of the day, simply cannot expect their analysts to know everything. And that's why in cybersecurity, it's really important that organizations are taking advantage of the broader expertise, the broader knowledge base of the cybersecurity community as a whole, and force multiplying their own capabilities and their knowledge by partnering with other organizations, right? And so, for example, organizations can partner with Unit 42 to build upon their expertise and have expertise on demand, share ideas around TTPs or IOCs that they might be looking into. And so with that, I want to start by talking about what it is that Unit 42 does on a daily basis and how we operate internally. And so in Unit 42, we tap into more than 200 threat researchers across the entire organization. All of these researchers come from varying backgrounds. They have specific disciplines. They all have varying subject matter expertise, which goes to what Joe was just talking about, right? Having the capability to tap into a pool of experts that have different focus areas, and then we can take all that information and basically combine it into intelligence that provides us with a broader understanding of the entire attack landscape, right? And so we've got malware reverse engineers, we've got folks that are dedicated to researching application vulnerabilities, endpoint-based threats, cloud research experts, and so much more. And as an organization that's helping to protect more than 90,000 customers across various verticals across the globe, those organizations actually generate more than 500 billion, that's with a B, events every single day. And those events essentially provide Unit 42 and our researchers with the telemetry that allows us to identify, track, and then ultimately categorize malicious activity across not only network, but cloud and endpoint data sources as well. In addition to that telemetry that we gather from the products that are protecting our customers, we also work somewhere in the realm of 1,000 engagements every year, helping organizations with responding to incidents that range from, nation state actors to time-sensitive ransomware matters, business email compromise, and basically everything in between. And because of that, we are on the front line, we're boots on the ground, helping organizations respond to attacks that are happening today. And that provides us with unique visibility into not only what's happening in the broader landscape through our telemetry across all of our customers, but we can see the different tools and the TTPs that threat actors are using to carry out attacks against organizations. And what that allows us to do is essentially we can combine that intelligence that we're gathering internally and share that with over 200 threat intelligence partnerships that we have today, which range from public and private sector. We've got strong relationships with intelligence partners, with law enforcement agencies around the world. And by partnering with Unit 42, essentially, you can tap into that expertise and you can consume services like our expert threat briefings or our expert malware analysis, or maybe you are simply reaching out for help whenever you have an incident and you need additional assistance or you need some intelligence that's going to support the decisions that you have to make based on the incident that you're working. And so that solves the expertise challenge that Joe was just talking about. But he also mentioned two other challenges, which are too much data to consume, right? And the fact that there is disparate or disconnected tools that organizations are using, and they're trying to build cyber threat intelligence programs using a variety of different tools that they're essentially bolting together. And so with that, we're also helping our customers solve those challenges of too much data and disparate tools through our XSOAR platform. And so our XSOAR platform helps organizations with the automation and orchestration of a number of security tasks, including managing and operationalizing threat intelligence. And in particular, our threat intelligence management, or TIM module, helps organizations take full control of all of the threat intelligence data that they are either generating internally from their own tools, from their own log sources, as well as from anything external, any partnerships that might exist or any vendor relationships that might exist. And the TIM module essentially allows you to aggregate all of that threat intelligence into a centralized location, and you can automate things like indicator ingestion, normalization across various different format types, right? Joe talked about how, you might be dealing with varying format types, sticks feeds, other, maybe it's just a CSV or a spreadsheet that someone is sharing. You want to be able to consume all that information and normalize it so that's easy to analyze and perform correlation across all of those indicators. There's even the ability to do things like assess reputation or indicator scoring that happens automatically once that data has been ingested. And you can then correlate that threat intelligence on any existing security incidents that you're investigating, right? So as you're pulling in information from external sources, let's say, it's the Unit 42 feed, you can then assess those indicators across any incidents that you might be managing in XOR or other security tools and identify if those indicators are showing up in any of the incidents that you're investigating, or automatically using automation and playbooks, push out high fidelity indicators to your security tools, right? And you could do things like update firewall rules or create correlation rules within your SIM technologies. And I just talked about how Unit 42 gathers and shares threat intelligence. Well, with the threat intelligence module, Unit 42 threat intel is actually included out of the box, meaning you can correlate and strengthen your own intelligence or intelligence that you're aggregating from other partners against what Unit 42 is seeing, which again is based on all the telemetry, the incident investigations, and the research that we're doing on an independent basis. And so as you can see in the example here, there's hundreds of available threat intel playbooks that are available. In this case, this is a playbook that you can run against all indicator types, right? IPs, file hashes, domains or URLs that you might be importing. And you can measure that against external sources or external partnerships and enrich that data so that as it's being ingested, as it's being aggregated into the centralized console, you have all the information you need on that indicator. And so with that, while you can start with built-in Unit 42 intelligence within the TIM module, you can also leverage integrations to consume additional intel from more than 160 other sources that are supported within the XOR TIM module today. Whether that is your internal tools or any partnerships that you have in place, you have the ability to set up simple integrations, pull all that data in, and we'll do the ingestion and normalization for you automatically. All of that intel from those sources, again, is aggregated, normalized, and that's saving your analyst from having to do that manual work themselves, right? You can remove the repetitive tasks from that analyst work stream, and that allows them to focus on the interesting stuff, right? The stuff that really mattered and is moving your security programs forward, right? Things like researching threats, understanding the latest attack vectors, maybe doing threat hunting within your organization. All of that correlated intel from those various sources is going to help your security teams make more informed decisions, and effectively that is operationalizing that threat intelligence to protect your organization. And so in this example here, you can see how intelligence for single hash in this case, which is, by the way, ingested from multiple sources, has been aggregated into essentially one centralized indicator view. And what we're looking at here happens to be a hash for Ryuk ransomware. And what you can see is in this view, the analyst has the ability to get all of the information they need about the hash reputation from various sources. They could even identify associated indicators like any IP addresses that might be associated with this file, any specific endpoint behaviors, right? Is it creating registry keys? Is it creating persistence mechanisms? All of that can be aggregated into a centralized view, allowing them to basically look at the full picture for that indicator and then make more informed decisions, right? And so they can automate the investigation, they can automate their response functions, and they could even do things like deploy updated detection signatures, they can hunt for persistence mechanisms, they can share intel all of that can be accomplished through playbooks that have been established and either could run automatically or could require some analyst input to ultimately make decisions to take an action within your organization. And essentially, all of this is helping to enhance your programs with what we call, Joe mentioned this previously, a threat-informed approach, right? And so you're able to truly operationalize that threat intelligence, protect your organization based on the best threat intelligence, the aggregation, the correlation, the strengthening of those indicators from multiple sources, including Unit 42. And so those are just a couple of ways that we're helping customers with solving the CTI program challenges, with operationalizing cyber threat intelligence and managing their programs. And so with that said, I think we've got some time. So maybe we'll jump to answering a couple of questions that I see here. And Joe and Kyle, I'll just throw this out openly, and then either of you can jump in and answer the question as you see fit. The first question we have here is, how can organizations assess their own maturity against operationalizing threat intelligence? What do you guys think?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, Josh. Realistically, there's a lot of industry veterans that have created several different models that we can leverage in terms of being able to assess the maturity of not only the threat intelligence program that the organization is implementing, but also the different methodologies that the organization is using. The two models that kind of come to the forefront of my mind is the Threat Intelligence Maturity Model, or TIM, T-I-M-M as it's called, which essentially helps organizations do kind of a gut check or a maturity model evaluation to make sure that they're continually progressing in their maturity model. And then the second model is the Detection Maturity Model, or DMM. This Detection Maturity Model is meant to help organizations analyze how effective they are in detecting adversary TTPs across their organization. And that's another really good way to kind of assess their own maturity in terms of implementing their own CTI programs. But those are the first two models that really kind of jump to the forefront of my mind, Josh.
Cool. Looks like we've got another question. This is a good one. What role does source rating have in operationalizing threat intel?
Yeah, source rating is another important concept that we didn't really touch on throughout the presentation, but I think I'm glad someone asked it because it is important. The source rating indicators, specifically in regards to CTI, are for source enrichment, and that ultimately helps establish a source, and that can be either human or technological, and it helps assess, is that source reliable or not? Source rating indicators also help establish a baseline trust rating for any source. So at a gut check or in a quick analysis format, this kind of gives threat intelligence analysts and researchers the capability to very quickly understand, is the data that they're getting from a specific source typically reliable, not reliable, unusually reliable, et cetera. And it, again, gives us that gut check to be able to really understand, is that data typically sound? Is it typically actionable, or is it not? So it's a great gut check for a CTI analyst to see and to rate their sources specifically on how reliable they are on that information.
To add on to what Kyle was saying, oftentimes we refer to this source rating as admiralty, and it's not something that we made up in the cyber threat intelligence community. It's something that we adopted from the overall intelligence community. And most oftentimes, admiralty, the ratings that it provides for a source of information is largely, like Kyle was saying, centered around the credibility of the source information, as well as the reliability of that source material.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And the last question looks like we have time for is, what is the difference between strategic, operational, and technical threat intelligence?
Yeah, so I'll take a stab at that one. Again, we didn't really cover this in the conversation, but it's really important to notice and to kind of differentiate between those three different types of intelligence. So from the tactical perspective, we'll kind of start there. That's intelligence and data related to how TTPs and what TTPs are defined by threat actors that they're leveraging to ultimately achieve their objective. So this is looking more broadly at the attacker, understanding more broad trends about TTPs associated with their activity, with the idea being that this could inform key stakeholders at senior decision-making level or at the individual contributor, the analyst level as well. So this is kind of a multi-form type of intelligence that can be leveraged across the organization in many different ways. Strategic intelligence is typically non-technical threat intelligence that relates to the threat landscape and related information related to that. Strategic CTI is commonly used by senior decision-making individuals throughout the organization to better inform them, to better inform the senior decision makers on where they need to actually get budget allocation for specific tool sets, for specific types of introspections into their logs, et cetera. And that's strategic intelligence, with the idea being that it's really geared towards those senior decision makers throughout the organization. And then finally is operational. This is the most common intelligence that's generated typically by CTI analysts. And this is typically done in the way of like spot reports with technical indicators that are extracted from other sources of intelligence. Oftentimes, the key benefactors for this is intelligence could be a mix of senior decision makers and or technical teams like the SOC. So those types of spot reports can be leveraged by senior decision makers to understand threats that they're seeing inside of their organization, or it could be used by technical teams like a SOC to go out and do proactive blocking on indicators that might have been unearthed from all of that activity.
To kind of supplement what Kyle was saying and to add my 2 cents to it, if we're looking at technical threat intelligence, we mentioned before when we were talking a little bit about how we feel that that if your threat intelligence program is driven by your security operations center, then this is more tactical in the sense that technical intelligence is utilized to harden your attack surface or improve your overall security posture as an organization. From a strategic point of view, when we said that we see a shift in the overall threat intel programs out of the SOC into more mature offices, such as the Chief Information Security Officer's office, this is largely where the strategic intelligence is utilized to inform decision-making for the overall organization. And what we like to see is we like to see a combination of both of those things in operational threat intelligence so that it can inform the decision-making around threat for your overall organization, and can drive forward programs such as threat-informed defense or digital risk protection, but essentially operationalizing what we see in threat from a technical and strategic level to make better decisions for the overall organization.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you both. Really appreciate your insights. And so just to summarize really quickly, today you heard about what is cyber threat intelligence? How can you use it, right? How do you operationalize it through CTI programs, and how can those programs help? You also heard about some challenges to consider. And then lastly, how we at Palo Alto Networks can help you to overcome those challenges. And so with that said, I want to thank you all for joining our presentation. Again, thank you, Joe and Kyle, for sharing your insights on operationalization of threat intel. You guys are true pros, and so we appreciate your feedback there. And if anyone is interested in learning more, feel free to check out our resources. And again, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We're happy to continue the conversation. Thanks a lot. Take care, everyone.
All right. Well, thanks to Joshua, Joseph, and Kyle for putting together a really informative presentation, and for all of those insights there in the Q&A too. Really appreciate their time today. And before we wrap up, we have one more piece of business, and that is the Amazon gift card prize drawing. And the winner of the $250 Amazon gift card is Sam Zaza from Tennessee. So congratulations to Sam. We'll be in touch to get you your card. And with that, on behalf of the Actual Tech Media team, I want to thank Palo Alto Unit 42 for making this event possible. And thanks as always for attending and for your great questions. That's going to conclude today's event. Have a fantastic rest of your day.